Hey, Nebraska fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson of Husker Big Red, and joining me is Danny Gillette of thegreatcornholio.org. And today, we're going to talk about which head coach has been the bigger disappointment for Nebraska fans, Scott Frost or Fred Hoiberg. Both came, as a big time hires. They were supposed to be the savior of their program, and so far, it hasn't worked out that way. So, we're going to break it down here. Make sure if you like our content, subscribe to the channel, like this video so that others can see this as well. But Danny, I will kick it over to you. I mean, both coaches don't have the best records, and it's kind of an interesting debate. So, what's your first thoughts on the subject?
Nothing like getting a little riled up on a Saturday afternoon, but it's really interesting when you look at, like you said, when Frost and Hoiberg were hired. You know, Frost in particular, kind of promised in his introductory press conference that he would bring Nebraska back, and those words have kind of come back to bite him. And then Hoiberg, he came to Nebraska with success at Iowa State. He led the Chicago Bulls into the playoffs, and he was thought as somebody who could save the Nebraska basketball program, who at the time had a rough 2018 2019 season under Tim Miles. And, now I will say this: people forget. People say, Tim Miles would have been better. And yes, he, helped lead the program to NIT tournament appearances. But that 2018-2019 season, I believe it was Isaac Copeland who got hurt. And there was just a myriad of injuries in addition to that. And Nebraska just went downhill. So I don't know if Miles would have been the answer to stay long term. But with things the way they're looking right now under Hoiberg, you know, kind of makes me wonder.
Yeah, there's a few instances now in Nebraska history where, we fired a coach and you have to sit there and wonder has the grass always greener on the other side? Because looking back to they fired Frank Solich for Bill Callahan, and that was a disaster. And then they fired Bo Pelini for Mike Riley, and that was a total disaster. Tim Miles did leave Nebraska to one NCAA tournament berth, and on they he had some 20-win seasons. Let him go. And Fred Hoiberg was a home run hire. I mean, he had multiple, I think like 420-win seasons at Iowa State. He built them into a top 20 program. And Iowa State is no big time powerhouse. So there was no reason to think, he wasn't going to be able to do that at Nebraska. I figured it would take a little bit of time in the Big Ten, but I legitimately thought Nebraska would be like cruising, getting 15, 20 wins every year by now under Fred Hoiberg. So I'm just really shocked that he hasn't produced up to this point. He's gotten some good recruits, but it just hasn't worked out. And he's 9-50 in Big Ten play, and that's just that stuns me. I would have never thought that was possible. I didn't think that Scott Frost would be 15-29 or whatever either. I guess, but
When you look at Hoiberg and his conference record, technically he has improved. 2-16 in 2019-20 conference play, 3-16 in 2020-21 conference play, and 4-16 in 2021-22 conference play. And there was some good good showings in the back end of the season. They were able to upset some ranked teams, but boy, that consistency for Hoiberg is not there. And then you mentioned Frost, and he struggled mightily in 2019 or sorry 2020 and 2021, but 2021 there there were close losses. Nebraska was in some of these games, and I know that's a big talking point, and I know fans don't want to hear that, but I at least saw progress last season for Nebraska football. Nebraska basketball I'm really not seeing a whole ton of progress, and I really don't see any reason to be optimistic because it's one thing if you beat a lesser tier school, and Nebraska basketball can get some easy wins. It's another thing once we get to conference play, and that's when we are really exposed, in my opinion, as far as how much of a gap there is between us and the rest of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, when Tim Miles was at least at Nebraska, Pinnacle Arena, it wasn't easy to win there. It was a tough place to play. Nebraska had one of the best home court advantages in the Big Ten, and it still does. They still do. I mean, Nebraska fans, they pack that place, but the product has to start. Media. It's kind of like what Trev Alberts talked about. The fan base is rabid. It's the best fan base I think in the world in any college sport. But at some point, you've got to put a winning product on the field. And the basketball, yeah, that just hasn't happened. Scott's or Hoiberg got some good players. McGowan's was a really good player, and he was fun to watch. But looking forward, maybe there'll be a more cohesive team. Maybe he'll adjust his recruiting strategies a little bit, but he's got to find a way to get some long term development. And it's been pretty clear that kind of the strategy of trying to find these JUCOs and transfers and whoever that hasn't worked out in the Big Ten, and so he needs to adjust that, and hopefully we'll see some progress this year because I just don't really see where the program goes from there, and it's just hard to believe that Fred Hoiberg could be a failure at Nebraska as a head coach, but I didn't believe that Scott Frost could be either, and we're sitting here going into year 5 and we haven't even made a bowl game yet.
Well, what puzzles me about Nebraska basketball is they had the 18th overall ranked recruiting class in 2021. Bryce McGowan's was the star, and then they were also able to bring in Wilhelm Bredenbach, freshman, who you know is supposedly an impact player. He got hurt last season, so he didn't really have time to develop. He's on track for this season, so I'm curious to see how you know he continues to develop and if he can become a key player for the program. And then for the 2022 class, they got another four-star player in Ramil Lloyd Jr. And so it's not like the talent's not there. The talent is there for the basketball program. It's just about the execution.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing with, basketball recruiting, and this happens a lot because you get these really talented freshmen, but they're not quite ready for like Big Ten basketball. It's a big step up. And so I think that you see teams that are able to get, guys to stay for 2 or 3 years and the talented guys. I mean, those are the teams that are able to win. And sometimes it means, not recruiting a bunch of 5-star guys, or having you need that 5-star guy to be more of a complementary piece than being your go-to guy. I mean, McGowan's had some great moments, and he did a lot of one-on-one things, but the defense was horrible. I mean, and that's a common thing among freshmen because it's in high school, if you're a little late getting your hand up, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal. But in the Big Ten, and the guy, shooting from the corner is a 40% career 3-point shooter. If you give him if you give him any vision of the hoop at all, it's going to go in. I mean, so there's just a huge difference there. And I think when you get those talented guys, it seems like by the time, they should be able to, kind of produce on the floor, they're leaving. So, he needs to find a way to, keep those talented players there and, find a right mix. But the roster building needs to change and, hopefully, getting some better recruits will help with that. But, I think he thought he could come in and kind of build everything through transfers like he did at Iowa State. And that just didn't work out very well.
And I think the type of player that Nebraska basketball recruits, like you talk about, I'll just say Cam Mack, for example, Bryce McGowan's, those type of point guard, shooting guard playmakers, they're used to being the guy. They're used to taking these teams and carrying them on their back, and they're used to being the centerpiece of an offense. And that is certainly good in terms of, you know, teams in high school when they need that guy. And you don't really need team basketball to win. When you get to the collegiate level, you need playmakers, but playmakers that work well together and pieces that fit well together. And so far, Nebraska basketball hasn't been able to find that.
Yeah, I mean, just look, I just was kind of perusing the stats last year, and the Huskers they were 347th, in the country in points allowed. So they basically were the worst defensive team in the country. They were 14th in the Big Ten out of 14 teams, and gave up 81 points. So I mean, there's just a lot of things that they've got to get fixed there.
Free throws are another thing too that they have seemed to struggle with, and that's something I don't understand. And it's something that's cost them games because you're leaving essentially free points on the line. And so, it's just been like a bunch of problems for Nebraska basketball, and that's perhaps the most frustrating thing. The talent is there, the execution is not. And you could say the same thing for Scott Frost and the football program, but I feel like there's just so much more schematically, that can work in a team's favor in a football game as opposed to a basketball game. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I agree. And it is perplexing that Scott Frost hasn't been able to win at Nebraska. Florida was interested in him. Some other SEC programs were interested in him, and it was like Nebraska was never going to get a coach like an elite kind of coach unless he had that tie. And he was the quarterback of Nebraska's last national championship team under Tom Osborne in '97. He knew the pressure, he knew what it took, but he was able to win at UCF. To me, he just seemed like the perfect fit. He seemed like a guy who could, put together good recruiting classes, and he's done that. But they have the recruiting rankings and what they've seen on the field, just hasn't added up. Wandale Robinson went to the NFL, but didn't produce as much as he should have at Nebraska. Dylan McCaffrey or Luke McCaffrey, sorry, was, a top 150 recruit. I mean, that was a big recruiting victory early for Scott Frost, and he was a total bust. Adrian Martinez was another, prize recruit. Didn't work out. I mean, you can say he's talented. I don't want to have that debate, but he didn't get the program to a bowl game. So to me, that he didn't pan out. And you've had just a bunch of guys like that have not panned out. So it's interesting. Recruiting in Nebraska is not easy, but I think the coaching staff, that didn't work out very well. We've kind of touched on that. So there's been a myriad of reasons why it hasn't worked out in football, but he's got to get it right here. And I do have more hope. Even if it doesn't work out with Scott Frost, I think another head coach can come in here and win. I don't think it's like a doomsday scenario. They just need to get some competency back in Nebraska football.
And I think the combination, and I think, the fact on, how do you put your players in the best position to succeed? I think that's a similarity for Frost and Hoiberg. Wandell Robinson, explosive player, was not a between the tackles running back. Wandale didn't even think so, and he went to Kentucky and succeeded and, was a perfect fit for a wide open offense. Not that I'm saying Kentucky had a wide open offense, but he had that playmaking ability. We just talked about the point guards and the explosive playmakers for Hoiberg and Nebraska basketball, but where would they fit in the grand scheme of an entire offense? So I think for both these coaches, in addition to records, the similarity is of not being, not knowing how to utilize talent effectively has really hampered them. It's one thing to get talent, but it's even more important to develop and, you know, make it fit, make that puzzle piece fit into the puzzle because you can have a bunch of five stars, but if they don't fit together, gel together, and work well together, and if you as a coach can't identify, where this talent fits, then it's all for naught.
Yeah, and being in the New England area with Bill Belichick, he is great at putting people in positions to succeed. He doesn't ask people to do things they can't do. And that sounds like a simple thing, but too many coaches ask too much of their players. So, on that thought, let's wrap up here with a final thought. We kind of asked this question. We did some debate laid out on both sides. who do you think has been the bigger disappointment, so far during their tenure at Nebraska? We'll start with you, Danny. Scott Frost or Fred Hoiberg?
Hoiberg, 24-67 in 3 seasons, 9-50 in conference play. It's, you know, they seem to have only been able to win when they get the easy early November games in the schedule. November, December conference play has been an absolute disaster. I mean, you look at what he did at Iowa State: 115 wins, 56 losses, made it to the Sweet 16 and then the round of 64 in his final season before he took you know the NBA, took his talents to the NBA, so to speak. But Hoiberg has been an absolute disappointment, and I was really hoping for more with this Nebraska basketball program. Frost, I'm at least seeing progress.
And see, I'm going to disagree with you here. I'm going to take Scott Frost as the bigger disappointment, and the reason for me is that historically Nebraska basketball has never been successful. It's never won an NCAA tournament game. I can't remember the last time they won a regular season conference championship. They won the Big Eight championship in 1994. Eric Piatkowski, I can remember that. But it's never been a successful program. The football program, on the other hand, literally before, just a few years before Scott Frost took over, Bo Pelini was cranking out 9-win seasons like it was nothing. And I know Wisconsin blew us out quite a few times. In the bigger games, they got embarrassed, but I would take a 9-win season and over, getting embarrassed a few times over a 3-9 season any day of the week. So I think the football program has the resources to win. I just don't think there's an excuse to have 5 straight losing seasons now, I think is what it is. Like 6 and 7 years. That's unfathomable. Scott Frost has been the bigger disappointment, but I do think he has a better chance to turn it around. So with that, we will wrap up this video series. Remember, Nebraska fans, to follow the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. Check out the Husker Big Red podcast. Check me out, huskerbigred.com. And Danny Gillette here at the greatcornholio.org for all your Nebraska content. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.